Thanks so much for joining me today. We are going to dive into the conversation in a moment. First, I wanted to remind you that the show notes and links mentioned on this podcast are on my website at lizasivekmarketing.com. That's Liza with a Z and Civic with an S. So, okay, let's get started. Hey, magicians. Thanks for joining me again today. Today, I have my friend and mentor, Eric Lopkin of the Modern Observer Group with me today. And he and I are going to talk about why the excuse, "this is the way we have always done it," is no longer valid. And Eric, go ahead and respond to that question.
Well, I mean, my first response is that question was never valid.
Exactly.
You should, just because that's the way you've always done it doesn't mean that's the best way to do it. And especially with the rate of technological change, in particular, what we've seen over the last year, you should never assume that just because the way you did it was the best way you found to do it 4 or 5 years ago, that it's still the best way.
Exactly. And I just wanted to get that right out of the way because we're both pretty passionate about it. So, Eric, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company and your background.
I run the Modern Observer Group, which is a coaching and consulting firm. We do one-to-one coaching and mastermind groups for individuals and small businesses. We do small business consulting with operations, communications, and employee engagement for small to medium-sized businesses. But in a nutshell, our job is to get people and organizations to operate at peak performance. Define what it is you want to do, put together a plan to do it, and stay the course.
Which is why Eric is a mentor of mine. So that's fantastic. And your background is quite interesting to me. You've got broadcast, you've got journalism, you've got marketing. Tell us a little bit about the path that you took to get where you are.
Yeah, I started my career in investor relations. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's public relations dealing specifically with the stock market. So that's always interesting because half of what you want to tell, you're not allowed to tell.
Yeah, a lot of restrictions there,
Yes.
Even more now. Yep.
So I started there. From there, I became a creative director at a small ad agency in New York, specializing in recruitment. Between all of these other jobs, I have always been a freelance journalist. I moved into my own business in the late 90s. We published a magazine called Media Connection that covered pop culture, which was a lot of fun. We had a retail division that sold pop culture collectibles. And you can actually still see that magazine online. It's under the name Premier Pop C now. So if you go to premierpopc.com, you can still follow pop culture. We've been covering it for now well over 20 years.
Wow. Always new content there.
Yeah. So from there, I joined a company called Multex, which was a division of Reuters. And I published newsletters for them covering Wall Street and the internet and telecommunication sectors back during the dot-com boom of the late 90s. That was where I got my background in operations. So from there, I have bounced around doing operations and communications consulting for a lot of pharmaceutical companies, for media companies, and I've always bounced back and forth with my reporting and being a freelance writer. All of that leading up to 2009 when I decided that I was tired of working for other people. I was going to form my own company and take all of these projects I was doing on a freelance basis and turn it into a business. And we've been doing it ever since. A lot of our
listeners, can relate to that.
Yeah, and we've been doing the Modern Observer Group ever since. We've started out doing operations and communications consulting, and as the needs of our clients changed, we adapted to meet them, creating coaching programs for them, and always listening to the needs of the client.
So what you're saying is you didn't always do things the same way because they worked. Is that just circling it
I
back around to our theme?
I have never done things the same way. I'm always looking for a better way to do it, always trying to reinvent things. And quite frankly, if somebody tells me, well, this is the way it has to be done, my first response is, oh, well, now I have to prove you wrong.
That's
So,
right. That's right. I'm known with my clients as thinking out of the box, trying to find new places and other ways to gain reach, find clients where they're hanging out online that aren't the usual places. And it works. It's something that if you think about what your target audience does besides just search online, you can find a lot of new ideas and at least try them. It's always worth the risk. And one of the things that has always held me back as an employee or as my own boss is when somebody tells me, well, we can't do that. We can't do that because that's not the way we've always done it. And so in this particular office doesn't like to use that software program, or this person over here or the boss doesn't like to do it anyway, but on a spreadsheet or on a Google Doc, because that's the way we've always done it. And if I suggest that there's a way to do it better that could make it easier than that Google Doc, there's a lot of pushback. I mean, I've even worked somewhere that had, pretty high-tech equipment, but the bookkeeper was still using a green ledger book because they really didn't see any reason and with, pens and pencils, they didn't see any reason to start using QuickBooks or Oracle or anybody else that can do that for them and connect everything, because that was the way they had always done it. And it frustrates me because I see a lot of time that could be put into something more productive. I see a lot of frustration that they don't have to suffer through. But it's very hard to explain to people when they've got a set idea. And I mean, I have my own set ideas. You could explain to me to do something differently, and that's in my life. And I might say no for the same reason. I think it's human nature. But one of the things I've been thinking about is post 2020 and 2021, the years of the COVID, the idea of, doing virtual meetings and letting people all work from home was completely out of hand for most companies, especially small to mid-size. And owners and managers that wanted to oversee everyone and have them in the same room so they could communicate well. And suddenly they had no choice if they wanted to stay in business. And people who said, no, I don't understand Zoom, are suddenly on my volunteer board meetings that could never do it before and are suddenly doing it for work. Doesn't matter if they're young or old. If they just don't like the technology, they suddenly had to do it. They did. And volunteers don't have to do it. They chose to. So now that we're in this new stage of thinking, I wonder, Eric, what you think of the companies that are trying to bring everybody back in and say, well, we don't want to do this anymore because it's not the way we did it before. We want to go back to the way it was.
Well, I mean, what you're talking about, especially with new technology, people understand that there's a learning curve. And they want to avoid that learning curve. And how they do that is they go, well, I'm so used to it that I am faster this way than if I try to do it a new way. And usually they can prove that in the short run. And I will give you an example going back to 1964.
Oh, hold on. Let me put my time traveling hat on.
Yes.
That's before my time.
Yes. 1964. AT&T introduced something called the touch tone phone, and they introduced this at the New York World's Fair. Now, for those of you not alive way back then, phones used to be rotary. So when you dialed a phone, there was an actual dial on the phone, and you dialed all the way around, and then the dial had to take the time to come back to the starting position, and then you chose the next number, dialed it around, and you did that for every number. So it was a fairly slow process. AT&T was telling people, well, the touch tone is so much easier. It's just push buttons. You don't have to wait for the rotary dial to return. And they set up a booth at the World's Fair to showcase this. Here's the problem. The people going to the booth did not know the layout of the touch-tone phone, where the numbers were located. So they were all faster on the rotary because they knew where the numbers were and didn't have to hunt them out. Now, of course, once they learned it, it was much faster. But until they did, doing it the way we've always done it was a better way in their mind.
Yes.
So you have to overcome that learning curve. Now, people are always going to be resistant to change. It's the whole thing about getting out of your comfort zone. It's called the comfort zone for a reason. It's comfortable. People like to be comfortable. But progress is made outside the comfort zone, and you have to do this. And actually, I'm seeing a lot less pushback now than in previous times, especially with virtual meetings. To give you an example, the other day, I run a networking group. We announced that when everything goes back to in-person, this particular group is going to stay virtual. And I expected pushback from that, and instead I got cheers. People were actually happy that it was going to stay virtual because they didn't have to deal with travel time. They didn't have to worry about getting somewhere and leaving work a little early to get there. So they were thrilled that it was going to stay virtual. So as people get used to the advantages of doing something a new way, they adapt. But you do have to drag people kicking and screaming to get them to understand that, yes, there are better ways to do it than what you've been doing for the past 10 years.
You know, your example of the rotary phone is funny. And because we may have millennials on here, I'm going to have to do a, show note link for this to YouTube to show people what one is, I think. But yeah, I remember those. We had those till I was in elementary school. So and the touchstone was around, but a lot of people still had rotary. So exactly what you're saying about the Zoom, a lot of people were quick to adapt it once they understood Zoom with its incredible influx of members and money. I think really as fast as they could added advantageous things that made it faster and easier for people who were not full adapters or early adapters to get right on. I had been using Zoom for a couple of years at that point. And I saw people understand it very quickly, especially as links were made easier, join meetings were made easier. They only had to download it the one time. It was quick. It doesn't slow down their computer, and people seem to adapt to it pretty quick. The example you gave about the rotary phone, too, going back to that, another thing that a more modern example that reminds me of this is when we went to the chip and we had to put the card in. Everyone will tell you, oh, it takes so much longer. It doesn't. It feels like it takes longer because you have to leave your card until it tells you to take it out. If you're not standing there watching it and holding that card, it doesn't take any longer. But people do think it takes longer. It's a very similar situation. It's because until they got used to it, it was, I'd rather just swipe. I'd rather just hand you my card. Though for security, don't hand anybody your card anymore if you don't have to. So one of the things that I've also noticed with the Zoom and some of the things I've been reading is a lot of people have been studying how people are doing working from home. And a lot of people didn't want to. And I know personally people who don't want to stay virtual because they prefer to be in an office with other people. That's the environment they like. Two things are happening, right? One is companies are saying maybe we don't need as much real estate and office space. Maybe we can share desks and people can be half at home. We can trust you now. We figured out how to watch you if they feel they need to watch you. And the other thing is that studies that I've read here and there have said up to 85% of people, if told they have to go back to an office full time, would look for another job. I think that's a higher number, speculatory on my part, that people would not really say, I quit, I'm going to go look for another job. But I think that's a much higher percentage than ever because more people have done it, tried it, and don't want to go back. What are you seeing out there? And what do you think of that?
Yeah, it's definitely a trend that you're going to see fewer people in an office. Some of the big tech companies, Facebook, Google, have said they're not going to have their people come back till at least next year
Mm-hmm.
And even then, they're looking at, well, do we really need all of this space? Let's let them work at home. People have adapted and they're realizing, hey, I just got rid of 2 hours in the car every day. I don't have to do that anymore.
Right.
I'm saving money. I'm saving money on gas. I'm not going out to eat every day for lunch. I can just go to my kitchen and make myself something.
I don't have to make the train. Right.
Yes. So it's actually a benefit for people to be working at home because they're getting paid the same, but they're saving more money because their costs are less. The same way businesses look at this going, well, how can we reduce costs? Now individuals are going, hey, I had all of these costs that accompanied my job, work clothes, transportation costs, food costs. Now I don't have to spend all that. And if they're dealing with family, hey, my kid has a baseball game at 5:15. I don't have to leave work early anymore. I work until 5. I'm in the house already. We get up, we go, and take them to the ball game.
Oh yeah, that's a plus. And I think that the people who are saying, "Oh no, I need to get to work and get away from all this stuff in my house and all these people in my house," when the kids go back to school, it's going to be a lot easier. The kids are all back in school full time. You can have the house to yourself during work hours. It might be nice. You do have to stop getting distracted by laundry and dishes, but that's a whole other problem we can't help you with.
Well, but that's actually part of it is, people want to stay home because they have the flexibility, but there's also people that want to go back to the office because they miss the human contact.
Yes.
They miss going into the break room or the water cooler and talking with coworkers.
Getting to know the people you work with is very important for some people, especially like for myself. I like to know who I'm working with, who I can help, who can help me over time. I'm a networker, and even though I work from home, I really miss not having client meetings on site as often. I really miss not having our network groups with the Empower group and that Eric runs. And virtual is for businesses, networking, everything, medical appointments, school. One of the things we're all missing is the body language, and you were talking about
Yes.
clothing. Babylon Bee joked that they put up a satire headline in the beginning of COVID that top sales have gone up in retail, but nobody's buying pants. And a month later, that study actually came out. They're like, we can't even be satirical about this anymore. That study actually came out that the sales of bottoms has dropped. The bottom has dropped out of bottoms, guys.
Yes.
And so people are buying things they have to wear on camera, but are just keeping with their jeans or their pajama pants or their leggings. And remember not to stand up, people.
At the beginning of COVID, I don't remember if it was Virginia or North Carolina, but there was a town down there that there was a story. The police had to issue a statement reminding people to put pants on when they went out to check the mail. Because they were going to the curb, going to the mailbox, and forgetting that they hadn't put pants on.
This is what we've become. Bunch of Donald Ducks running around. That's right. Winnie the Poohs. I think that the body language thing is big, though. Getting back to that, I think that not being able to see if somebody's tapping a foot or is, fidgeting. I fidget a lot when I'm on camera. You can tell if I'm fidgeting, but I'm always fidgeting. Other people, they can hide it better. And not having that interaction to see that a client or an employee is unhappy or frustrated. I think we're missing something there. So I think having a flexibility to have meetings in person, if your staff isn't far flung, is still going to be important. And I wonder if that's going to be considered among a lot of these bigger companies or even smaller companies.
I'm sure it will, because there's 3 real levels of communication that we do on a daily basis. And, number 1 is voice. And you can hear the inflection. And of course, you lose that when you do something like texting or email. then you're just getting the message. And how many times have you tried to put a joke into an email and somebody gets offended because they're not getting your inflection? So there's
Right.
the, there's the voice, then there's the facial expression, and then finally there's the body language. And each of these levels tells different information. So in person, you get all of these. Video, you get voice and you get facial. You really don't see the body language. Email and texting, you don't even get that. So every time you take away one of these methods of communication, it increases the probability that there's going to be a misunderstanding.
Correct. Now, bringing this around to the marketing aspect, which we both deal with daily, we are going to be marketing to people who are home now and doing exactly that, just reading, just talking to people that they're thinking of buying from on video. And they can't do things the way they always did. I see an advantage to that in a lot of ways, because we can connect with people anywhere at any hour that's convenient for both of us without having to travel 2 hours. And we may lose some of that body language, but hopefully we would meet in person as well at some point. When somebody is going back into the office and they're wanting to, change things around a bit and say, okay, I'm going to go back to the way I did it, and I'm going to want to do just in-person meetings, or I'm just going to do, PowerPoints, et cetera. People are not going to just get into that now. I mean, I think a lot of meetings have been scheduled and maybe overscheduled once everyone got used to Zoom, but there's a lot of people still reluctant to do a sales pitch over video, et cetera. And a lot of marketing and things like that. They're still afraid to do online, but now that's really where we're going to be reaching people more so than ever. Would you agree?
It really is. And there's no reason to be nervous about doing these things online. Over the course of the last year, major companies have merged, never having met in person. All of the negotiations were done via video conference. So there shouldn't be a fear factor involved. The other thing people have to remember, especially when they're looking to talk with other people, is that you may decide you're going to do all of your meetings in person. But if the other person hasn't made that same decision, you're going to have to compromise and probably do things online. Just because you say, I want to do things the way I used to, doesn't mean that's even feasible anymore. I'll give you an example in Facebook advertising. Facebook advertising used to be very targeted because they would track everybody's data. Now, Apple has given people the ability to opt out, so Facebook can't track that data anymore. And Google just announced that they're going to add the same feature to Android phones, I believe, next month. So all of this is the way I used to do Facebook advertising. You've got to change all of it because that data is no longer available to you. You have to respect your customers' privacy rather than relying on these huge data dumps. So things are changing whether you want to or not. So your decision I want to do this because that's the way I've always done it, you're being left in the dust because everything is changing around you.
And I think that includes software. I think that includes programming. I think that there's been new things coming out with everyone working from home on projects. I've seen some really great innovation come out of this time because they had time to work on something they had on the back burner, or they had to think about new ways to do it. So if you're willing to adopt the new innovation that somebody else is doing, then why not be willing to adopt new innovation within your office? Why not, say, okay, what can we do new and different? Because this is a whole new level in a lot of ways. It may not seem like it's touching every part of your business, but it really is. Everybody's attitude is changed now. We've been standing 6 feet away from each other for, a long time. It feels like forever. And we can't shake hands. We bump elbows, we wave, we don't do anything. Not shaking hands was a really weird thing for me when I would go out, but you can't do it. And matter of fact, the only place that I went to that still shook hands ended up getting a COVID outbreak there. So, I think that was probably a smart move early on when we didn't know how the contagion worked. And now it's elbow bumps and how you doings, and people were coming up with their own things. So right from the get-go, meeting somebody, people are going to be very wary. And if you're going to say, okay, well, I want to come lay out this information to you about advertising or sales, and I want to come to your office and do it, there's a lot of people who are going to be reluctant to do that for a long time, possibly longer than necessary, because it's whatever they feel safe about. Maybe they have a reason. Maybe they don't want their staff to get sick. Maybe they have their own reason not to do it for medical reasons or personal reasons. So we're going to have to continue to respect that, and respect that if you feel that way, someone else may not. Someone else may say, well, I'll just come to your office. And you can say, well, I can do a Zoom meeting, or we're going to have to put it off, et cetera. They're going to have to accept that. So it goes both ways. What else would you say marketing wise is going to be affected by the idea that we can't do things the same way? I mean, I know we could never do things the same way we always did, but what else do you think has really changed in not being able to use that excuse anymore?
Well, the big thing is people's habits and what they've gotten used to. Just prior to this, I was actually on a call with the owner of several ShopRite supermarkets, and he was telling me just before the pandemic hit, they have online shopping, and they would average, 70, 80 orders a week. A really busy week, they might hit 300. Now they're averaging 600, 700 orders a week because people want to do this online. They didn't want to go into the supermarket. Some of these people aren't going to come back into the supermarket. They're going to want to continue to do things online. Other people are rushing back into public because they're tired of being locked up at home. But people's attitudes have changed, and they're always changing. I absolutely despise the statement, the new normal.
Oh, God, yes.
Because the new normal is always new. Normal is adapting to change. We're always changing. Everything around us is always changing. So you have to adapt.
Yes.
And that means you have to talk the language that your customers are talking. You have to relate to them the way they want to be related to. If your customer is more comfortable doing business by text, you need to text them. If they're more comfortable communicating by email, you need to email them. If they're going to be more comfortable doing a Zoom meeting or meeting you in your office, you have to do it the way the customer wants.
Yes, I get Facebook messages. I get Instagram messages. That's where people are. That's how they want to message me. I can't force them to just email me. I can't force them to just text me. They're going to do it from wherever they are. And I had to adapt. I have to go and check everything and gather all those messages up and get them in one place, because that is how my client wants to reach me. And
exactly.
When you offer a premier service, you do what the client wants you to do as far as how to communicate.
That's it. And that's, in our business, when we do a mastermind group or we have a new client come on for coaching, we actually do an assessment of them. And part of that assessment tells us how they want to communicate. And we have to work with that, because trying to change the client's way of thinking and the way they want to do things is counterproductive. They're coming to you for a service. They are paying you to help them solve a problem. Making another problem by not communicating the way they're used to doing it or the way they want to do it is just going to put a barrier that's unnecessary between you and the client.
Right. And you can't say to them, I know this is how you've always done it, but you can't use that as an excuse anymore because Eric and Liza said you can't do that.
Right.
You have to. That's not what we mean. No, what I mean is that, we have to adapt to the client. Now, the client has to adapt to new ideas if they want to move forward with their marketing and it's something they haven't tried before. I do think that more and more people are adopting new technologies, new ways of doing things. Like you said, people on a personal level are starting to use Instacart and starting to use all of that. My daughter, when the pandemic first hit, lost her nanny jobs for obvious reasons and had to go work for one of the big box stores that has a grocery that shall remain unnamed here. And she went from running around after little kids and getting a lot of steps in on her Fitbit to 30,000 steps a day because she was hired specifically to pull orders in the beginning of the pandemic. And my dad, who's in his late 70s, said, well, we think we're going to probably start ordering delivery soon, about, 6 weeks into the pandemic. And I said, there's a 2-week wait for order delivery for groceries, right? And he said, why? And I said, because it's you and every other single human being on the planet right now. So it's, besides mom, apparently, because she kept going in. But that was completely new to all of us. And now, as you said, a lot of people are like, why would I go back? Now I see it's worth the $5. It's worth the $10 to get my groceries delivered because I'm not driving home from work on the way past the grocery anymore. It's a whole thing. So every time one of those things changes, it has that domino effect. And just like any decision you make in your own business has a domino effect to affect other things in your business. Making those changes is hard. It can be a learning curve. It can be no fun at first, but the payoff can be great.
Yes, it can. And you bring up a good point with your father. People do not realize what is going on in your business when you are trying to communicate with them. They don't know how many other customers you have. They don't know what your margins are. All they see is what you're communicating to them. So when they come with, well, why does it take 2 weeks? You have to be able to communicate and market to them and explain what is going on. And the fact of the matter is, we all know the old saying, the customer is always right. The truth of the matter, the customer is almost never right, but you have to make them feel like they are. And it's all about how you're communicating with them.
I'd like to point out here, and I actually have this written down as an idea for another live or another podcast, that the origination of The Customer is Always Right was an advertising campaign by a department store way back in the old days, and all the other department stores copied that idea. But the originator actually went out of business by saying, yes, whatever you say, we will do. That department store no longer exists. So when someone tells me that I have to do whatever the customer says, I'm like, no, that's not a proven theory.
Yeah.
But we can tell you, it's not, I have no empirical evidence of that, but we can tell you that we will find the best way to do it. And when you market to someone, you find the best way for them and for you, because that's what's going to work for everyone. I can't continue to serve someone if I don't do it well or do it the way that each person asks me. So the customer is always right. Exactly. You have to make them feel that way. And right now that means continuing to offer curbside pickup for convenience when it's no longer a medical or safety reason, to continue offering, delivery, to continue offering online services like chat or live video that you didn't do before. And a lot of places have said they're continuing it. Medical offices that do things like hearing aid repairs. Other people I've spoken to have said, we're going to continue doing curbside for people. There are some advantages for a lot of different situations here, but bringing up specifically customers who are inconvenienced by having to go places because of disabilities. And I bring this up because Eric has some personal experience with this. And I know that I have two friends who, now that they don't have to, get in the car and go somewhere with a cane or with a walker or with a wheelchair. It makes life a lot easier for them to do business. Eric, why is there another reason why this is not a good excuse for you, that you can't just do things a certain way all the time?
Well, I mean, dealing with audiences with disabilities brings an entire different set of circumstances. And you have to remember that the person with the disability is probably not happy that they have this disability and that they have to deal with what has to be overcome. So when they're asking for something, if they need an accommodation, they're not doing this to be a pain in the butt. They're doing it because they don't have another choice. But the way they can be accommodated is constantly changing. And now, my specific disability is I am legally blind. Well, you'll see all over the web now is your website ADA compliant? Because now there's technology out there that allows me to zoom in, to make text bigger on websites, so I can see things easier. And realistically, if I'm going to a website to buy something and I can't see the details, now I've got my own software that I can zoom in. But if the website makes it easier for me, hey, they just got a plus in my book. I'm going to be more likely to buy from them.
Exactly. And what some people don't realize is that the alt text is not just there to put in keywords in your photos, etc. They want to know what's in the picture. Is it a picture that's describing something to you, or is it just a logo? And you should tell them that. And it's not just for someone who deals with a legally blind issue like yourself, but if someone's dyslexic, they may use the audio of that wording because it's a lot faster and easier for them than to try to read it. And we have to remember there's a lot of people who are loving that everything is online now and can be done with curbside pickup, et cetera, because it has changed how easy it is for them to use your business. And we are seeing a great majority of people who are finding an advantage there. There are disadvantages. My friends who are hard of hearing and my friend who is an ASL interpreter, it's really hard with masks. That's a problem. Clear masks are a lifesaver for them. But for online purposes and marketing purposes, there's so much more we can do now for that population. Because as Eric said, they're not choosing this. This is not what they'd like to do. They may not hate their life because of it, certainly, but let's not make it any more difficult for people who have a challenge with getting to our advertising and finding out what we do. So if this is the way you've always done it and you want to continue always doing it that way, think about why. Is it the learning curve? Is it something else? Is it because your staff is reluctant? I'm not saying fire everybody. I'm saying that now we know those staff members can, in fact, learn to adapt when they have to. And if they couldn't, this pretty much weeded that out. If you can't or refuse to, this is going to weed those people out. So don't be that person if you're an employee. Don't get weeded out. And Eric, what else? What else can you think to wrap this up with?
I think you have to remember that there are repercussions for doing things the way you always did it. Prior to automobiles, there were horse and buggies. Well, I'm sure that last company that made buggy whips, they probably made the best buggy whip out there, but they're still out of business because the world adapted and they didn't.
That's right. That's right. And, we have a wonderful anvil from my husband's great grandfather, who was the blacksmith in West Haven, Connecticut. And, I'm pretty sure that is not something that he was going to pass down for generations at this point. Not a lot of blacksmiths still in use, unless you're doing Renaissance fairs, Sturbridge Village, things like that. There's probably a few out there. So, yes, adapt. Don't be afraid to adapt. And be willing to go through a little bit of pain to find the better, faster way, because that's only going to help you. The consequences will be positive in that case.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Eric. And I'm going to remind all you magicians, don't forget to subscribe, follow, and download my podcast. And we will see you here next week. Wow, another fantastic conversation done. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Don't forget that all the links mentioned will be in the show notes at lizasivekmarketing.com. And while you're there, if you're a business owner whose marketing is on life support, check out the Your Virtual Marketing Department offer and take the Marketing Health Report quiz for free. For less than the cost of a full-time hire, we can take your marketing from frustrating to lead generating with an entire marketing team. So check that out, and I'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Marketing Myths and Magic, part of the Xvadio Podcast Network. You can find us at xvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.